listen, Arik Armstead is an every down defensive tackle. We all know that. The guy is dominant. He was brought here for a reason. But at the same time, hopefully they can, add up enough depth where he doesn't have to be an every single down guy, right? Like, I think Ryan Nielsen understands that. I think this organization understands that, where it's like you don't want to ask him to do too much because, once again, when you get up to be in your 30s and everything, regardless of how much you prepare, how hard, Father Time is undefeated for a reason. So I hope there's a plan in place. I'm not saying put this guy on a pitch count by any means, but also I don't want to see this guy out there on every single rep. I want to see him out there on the important reps.
Well, I mean, that's a little bit of the story. It goes back to like even Calais Campbell when he got brought in here or last year. It looked like they might sign him prior to last season. He wanted more reps. Like, he still felt good enough to be able to contribute more than 30% of the time or 27% of the time or whatever it was. And he didn't think he was going to get that role here. That was part of the equation. I don't know if it was all of the equation. So my guess is Armstead at 31 years old feels like he can deliver. Remember now, Calais at that time was playing two different positions for the Jags.
Yeah.
So
at an all-pro level.
Yeah, and like I say, and I don't say this lightly, I think Calais was so good in those first 2 years with the Jags, and that's what really the Jags are looking to get out of Armstead, right? You get a 3-year deal. If you can get 2 really good years out of him, then you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish because by year 3 you can probably get out of the deal. And so it's from a business standpoint only. Calais had 25 sacks in the 2 years when he joined the Jags. Both sack totals were better than any year he had had previously in Arizona, even though he'd been very consistent. He had his best years in Jacksonville in those 2 seasons, 25 sacks. And I've said this, man, if Arik Armstead can give you half that production, just look at what the Jags did this year. How many sacks did they have from the inside? Like Roy Robertson-Harris?
I think, was it 3.5 or something?
Was he even at 3?
2.5? No, I'm saying total.
Oh, total.
Interior
total
wise.
3.5.
I think 3.5.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
So if he could give you this coming year 7 sacks, and then next year 6 sacks, to me, because here's the other part of the equation for Armstead is I don't think Roy Robertson-Harris is a bad player. I don't think Devon Hamilton's a bad player. I think those guys now, you add this to depth, and when you do bring them in, you can't take a breath because I think they can pop and flash. Roy Robertson-Harris really has flashed the last couple years. So Gotsis would be the other one from that position because Smoot's really more primarily on the outside. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about 4.5 sacks.
3.5, 4.5? Yeah.
But what I think is Roy Robertson-Harris can still deliver 3.5 sacks on top of Armstead. And maybe, I mean, Devon Hamilton's job is not going to be sack the quarterback, or maybe you fall into one or something like that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, now all of a sudden you get that group, and that group altogether is up around 10 sacks.
For sure.
Right? That's a big deal.
No, it's a huge deal. And once again, you're bringing a guy in Arik Armstead who's also pretty solid in the run as well. Right? I mean, and the run was an issue towards the end of the season in terms of stopping, the rushers of Derrick Henry and Mixon, whoever else was kind of tearing the team apart. So, yeah, I do like the fact that one would think it's going to be a massive upgrade interiorly, and then you have to ask yourself, well, if you have Travon Walker on the outside, how much does that help him now, right? Because before, and once again, like I wouldn't say teams keyed in on Josh Allen last year because they didn't, because they also keyed in on Travon Walker. But you keyed in on the outside. The interior didn't really scare you at all. Well, now you've got Arik Armstead where teams got to put him on the board. If you're an offensive coordinator right now and you're breaking down the game records, as they call them, guess what? Arik Armstead should be on the board. If he's healthy, he's on the board. So now you got to worry about, well, we got to stop interior pressure, but we also have to stop, the 2 bookends of Josh Allen and Travon Walker. It's just more problems for offensive coordinators to have. Advantage Jacksonville.
I want to ask you 2 questions. I want to ask you a little more about Travon and Josh, and I also want to ask you about Armstead lining up over guards. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's play we've got another soundbite from Arik Armstead, and he doesn't use this in this part of the soundbite, but he says, and this will kind of sum it up, he's still an ascending player. He feels like going into year number 10 in the NFL.
Having longevity in this league is tough for a multitude of reasons. But I do view it as an accomplishment. But also, too, I view it as I got a lot more to give, a lot more to offer, a lot more good football ahead of me. And I view it as I continue to get better. Last year, I'm constantly working on my game, working on my craft, um, and I continue to get better. Last year I had one of my best pass rush seasons of my career in year 9, and so in the off season, what I do is I watch all my film, how to fine tune, get better, work on my technique, different things I need to do, work on my body, and then so I still feel like I'm an ascending player, even though that's tough to say, for most people in year 10.
Nice, Hamby. You got the long one. We did get to ascending player. Very good. That was Arik Armstead yesterday, and I think that's interesting perspective, right? He's always getting better. He's always tweaking. He mentioned, listen, he's coming off a meniscus injury. He says he's fine. He's going to be fine. And also, he said the last couple of years, yeah, he's obviously missed some games, but like the 5 years prior to that, he didn't miss a game.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's got a ton of injury history, but there is, going back to the original point, there's certainly a certain amount of risk signing a 31-year-old player, or a guy who's going to be 31 years old. So that's just part of the business. I like the risk the Jags are taking. I'll say that right now and maybe eat my words later on down the road, but I'm not going to be hypocritical here and say I don't like it. I really like it. I think the Jags needed it. I think it also solves an issue that I'm not sure you were going to get in the draft. Sure, there's a Byron Murphy. We have no idea how good that guy can be, right? Yeah. Maybe it's a Fisk, a Braden Fisk for Florida State. That could have been who knows if you're going to get those guys. Those might be the only two guys that really interest you from that standpoint. Or I thought they might do that because they could get younger and cheaper. But I really do like this move. I like it a lot, and maybe they end up getting younger and cheaper at wide receiver. We'll talk about that. Or maybe they get expensive at wide receiver. That's coming up in just a minute. But my two questions I have. One about Armstead. I don't know if it's discussed enough, but Aaron Donald's a great example of it, and Chris Jones is a great example of it. When you put these guys over a guard, is it the biggest mismatch you can get on that front? Is that what they're trying to do? Is that why J.J. Watt moved around a lot? Like, our focus is so much on the edge when we think pass rush, so much. Yeah. And what we learned when watching Tom Brady is if you were going to solve the Tom Brady mystery, if the kryptonite for Brady was to get him up the middle, right? Correct. That's what everybody started to learn. But I still don't think we pay attention a lot. We look at the matchups on the outside. Do you have the left tackle? Do you have the right tackle? Can you block the edges? But that's where the mismatch is, right? Usually over the guard, especially a guy with size and speed, that becomes very difficult for a guard to handle.
Yeah, so it comes down to a few things, right? Not knocking offensive guards out there, but traditionally your bigger, more athletic, better footwork guys are going to be at tackle. Okay, and then the guards are just kind of like the leftovers, if you will. Once again, no disrespect to guards out there, but agile. There we go. Exactly. So that's one reason why, right? Where you don't have the athleticism that you might have at a tackle. So yeah, advantage to lining up inside. But also, and let's bring physics into play here. What's the fastest way to a point? It's a straight line. Correct. So, yeah, there are some guys out there, like we talk about Von Miller in his prime. He was suited for the outside. Why? Because he had the hips and he was so quick off the ball where, I mean, for him, the straight line was, I don't even want to touch this player. I'm just going to run around him and get a quarterback sack. But if you have a guy like an Aaron Donald, a J.J. Watt, that you can get up the middle with a combination of strength and explosiveness and speed, well, then that makes the biggest difference in the world. I talked about it a while back on the show. We made our old show, Brent. We talked about how Aaron Rodgers, when we played against him, how we had to tailor our entire defensive scheme to stopping Aaron Rodgers in what we called the honey hole. And the honey hole is essentially every quarterback has a honey hole. When the pocket breaks down, when they feel pressure, they have a honey hole of where they want to step up and make that pass. Now, spoiler alert, Aaron Rodgers' honey hole, well, he's got a couple of them. Right? The guy seems to be comfortable wherever he goes. Patrick Mahomes is another guy. Now, there's some quarterbacks out there that they're not as mobile, maybe like a Kirk Cousins, where it's like they have their preference. If that preference is gone, they'll probably take the sack or make a mistake. So when we talk about that, a honey hole is usually going to be the A or B gap in terms of a quarterback stepping up, right? A quarterback stepping up in the pocket. Well, if you have an Aaron Donald, the Calais Campbell, or somebody that can bring that interior pressure, guess what? The quarterback can't step up in the pocket now, makes him very uncomfortable, and that increases your chances of a quarterback sack or even better, a turnover.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's why the Jags Again, Malik Jackson was a big part of what they were doing. Marcel Darius was a big part of when Saxonville was legit. You give credit to Calais, you should, to Yan Ngakwe, to even Fowler at that time for their rotation. They could go deep, and now I think this looks a little bit more like that. You can go deep now on that defensive front if they continue to add more pass rushers they did yesterday. This was a quiet pickup, I think. Yesterday by the Jags to get more depth. We'll see what else they do in the draft. I do think it's fascinating. Again, we're going to talk receiver in a moment. I do think it's fascinating to see what they would do if there was like a guy like a Jared Verse slips down to them versus maybe a top flight wide receiver at 17 if they were to stay put. All right, my other question I had for you about the really how it impacts or Armstead impacts everybody. Josh Allen and Travon Walker are coming off really good years. What's the belief that they can do it again? Mm-hmm. And is it fair to wonder, and do we haven't really done this enough, that they might even be better? I think we've done this with Travon, like, okay, hey, year 2, up to 10 sacks. It looks like he's trending in a good way. Certainly not his ceiling yet. I don't know if many people believe like Josh Allen can actually do what he did again. I wonder if people feel that way. But now you add, again, this depth on the interior, which you all of a sudden have a lot of confidence about. I do. You do, watching and listening, have a lot of confidence about their interior. What does that now do for, again, what was the best sack tandem in the National Football League, and 2, again, ascending players, 26 years old, 23, 24 years old? I mean, these guys are just finding themselves here in the National Football League potentially. Do they have monster seasons in 2024, even more than they just did in 23?
So here's the thing, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way. I think if Josh Allen has 18, 19, even a 20 sack season, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a good thing, because then I feel like Travon Walker isn't doing his part. Then I feel like Arik Armstead, what he was brought in here for, isn't doing his part. I'll be happy with 15 from Josh Allen, right? And then I'll be happy with double digits again from Travon Walker. Like, literally, if we can get a repeat performance of last year and maybe sprinkle on a couple more for Travon Walker, maybe sprinkle 1 or less off.
But the total of 27.
But the total of 27, and then you amplify that by the interior push, what we think is going to be coming, yeah, I'll take that all day. So I'm not to say, like, I'm not going to knock Josh Allen and say, man, I'm expecting 20, sacks who doesn't get it. I'm like, is he TJ Watt? I think he still has ways to go to try to prove himself to be a TJ Watt, if you will. But I also think, listen, you have the defensive lineman now. You have the pressures where you don't have to be that 17.5 sack season guy. I think you have Travon Walker who take another step forward. I think you have Arik Armstead who can help you out. So just get 14, 15, and we can call it a season.
Yeah, listen, I do think if he gets to – I think that's the big question. It's not whether he gets to 17.5 or whether he gets to 20. I think Myles Garrett this year had 14.5 or something, right? And I think he might have been player of the year.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Can you now get 14.5, 15, 15.5, 16? Can you be in that category? Are you going to drop down to 11 or 12? Which, by the way, isn't bad either. But there's 2 things going here. One, I believe people still don't give credit to Josh as how dominant he was at times last year. I mean, absolutely dominant of a player. They couldn't block him. Mm-hmm. The other thing is the pressure is about to go up on Josh. He's going to get $30 million a year, it looks like. And with that tag comes a nice payday, but also a lot of pressure to do it again. Now you're viewed as that player. When Trevor gets $50 million a year, he's that player. You've got to deliver. They're invested in that way. So I don't know if it's 17.5, but I kind of agree with you. I think it's more the totality. If it's 12.5 for Travon this year, that continues the ascent. That's great. Even if it's 15 for Josh, I think that's going to be a dominant year for him. So, but the bottom line is this. I think there are a couple of ingredients this year that benefit more than they had last year. Arik Armstead just added. I think a coach that is aggressive, and his specialty is defensive line, which means I think they're going to get after it. And I would say if things go well in Jacksonville, they will score more points and be out in front. See, I thought this defense would be decent this year because I thought the Jags would be out front and teams would have to come from behind. This would be opportunistic. You'd get turnovers. You'd get sacks. That is not the way it played out. That was not the case this year for the Jags. I think if they go back to where we thought they'd be, that means the Jags are now playing from ahead, and you get some of those cleanup sacks late in the game, Austen, right, when you're up by 10 points and guys are just trying to be desperate.
No, I mean, that was a story we talked about, kind of like a Super Bowl preview that we had with the Chiefs and the 49ers. The 49ers, by far, saw the least amount of runs towards their defense in the NFL.
That's right.
Why? Because they're always up, because they were explosive, because they scored a lot of points. Same thing can happen for Jacksonville, where if you get this, if you get an opponent down 10 plus in the fourth quarter, then you can that's when it's fun, Brent. That's when you can pin your ears back and start going to work, And, granted, for what Josh Allen's able to do with 17.5 sacks, can't be stated enough, where they were behind a lot, where, teams are trying to run the ball a little bit, play action, things like that, and he still got the job done. What does this defense look like when you're playing with the lead? When you can pin your ears back, when you know it's going to be third and long and a passing, situation? That's where you can really eat.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting if they're in that situation quite a bit. So I think the actual setup this year allows maybe Josh Allen, Travon Walker to get even more than they got. We'll see if that's the case. That's a lofty thing. Again, they led the league as a tandem with 27.5 sacks.